Have you ever been to a monastery? I've been to a few. I remember a couple of times I've spent the night in monasteries. I've spoken at some events that were hosted at these sacred religious sites, and let me try to explain the rooms where I've stayed. I mean, it's not like the Marriott. Let's start there. There were no flat screen televisions and multi port device charging stations. There weren't 12 fluffy pillows, way too many pillows at most hotels. There weren't 12 fluffy pillows on the bed. There wasn't cucumber water waiting for me at the check in desk. No, these rooms were simple. Very, very simple, extremely simple. A tiny room, maybe windowless. A single small bed, not comfortable. One pillow, sheets and one blanket. A wooden desk, a wooden chair, a small wooden cross hanging on the wall. And that's it. Maybe not every monastery is like that, but the ones where I've stayed, they've been exactly like that. And I'll be honest, I loved it. For one or two nights at least, man, I loved it. But it always makes me think about the real lives of monks and nuns and people who live in cloistered communities like this. How do they spend their time? How do they fill their days? What's it like not having a phone and a watch and a TV blaring at you all day and begging for your attention? What's it like trying to find more comfort and engagement for your soul than for your body? I'm guessing this is why monks invented beer. I don't know. Oh, by the way, there is a monastery on top of a hill just above the city of Prague in the Czech Republic. If you ever get there, eat the hot dog and drink their dark beer. Your life will be changed. God might have shown up for me in that hot dog and beer, but that's not the topic of today's podcast. Today's show is about taking a deep dive into the idea of monasticism and what it might be able to teach people like me and you about how we are supposed to be with each other. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. This is Matt Matson, the host of the Between podcast, and I want to get right into our conversation today with our very special guest, Paul Prins. Paul is joining me via Zoom from under the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower in beautiful Paris, France. Paul lives there with his wife, and they've got what looks like a really beautiful, idyllic Parisian life. And along with some other visionary folks in locations all over the world, they've created something really fascinating. I'm going to try to explain this a little, but Paul, I'm hoping you'll fill in the gaps here in a few minutes. Urban Monastics. And if listeners want to learn more, they should go to urbanmonastic.org. But Urban Monastics is an ecumenical Christian community of people living simple lives in cities who are grounded in monastic practices and rhythms. And we'll learn more about that. But you should know that Paul has been, he's been a minister in a bunch of different contexts, from churches to student ministries to homeless shelters. He holds a Masters of Divinity from Bethel Theological Seminary, and he's successfully founded a couple of companies back in previous chapters of his life. He's a mystic. He's a teacher, he's a writer, he's an artist, and I'm really glad he's here. Paul, welcome. And maybe will you start by answering the question that most of our listeners probably have? Wait, is this guy a monk?
Thanks, Matt. It's nice to be here. I guess I'm not really a monk. That's not a term I use for myself. We do within Urban Monastics, we call ourselves monastics. But we are this kind of like lay ecumenical community. And so we're not living in monasteries. We're not supported from a monastery. But yeah, I mean, living monastically, I think there's a lot of wisdom and insight there. And we can get into a bit more of what that is, but I prefer the term monastic. If you really want to slap that label on me, which is fine.
So when we did a little prep call, I don't know, a week or two ago, you very generously walked me through like the difference between a monastic and a mendicant, those terms. And by the way, I tried to then teach my wife that last night over dinner when I was talking about the fact that I was really excited about this conversation and completely screwed it up. And I remember at one point you used like Friar Tuck from some old
Yeah,
Robin
Robin
Hood
Hood.
stories
Yeah.
to help me. Will you teach any listener who doesn't really understand the word monastic? Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so monasticism has been around for a long time. It goes all the way back to the Desert Mothers and Fathers in the second, third century. And a lot of modern day monasticism finds its roots with Saint Benedict. And so that's in the 500s, early to mid 500s is when the rule of Saint Benedict was written down. And so to be a monastic in the church today, by and large, means that you are living a life dedicated to some kind of external rule. And so it's it sounds a little bit spooky for us in maybe the 21st century that you're kind of giving your life over to this document. But essentially, what it's doing is saying, hey, there's a way that we can set ourselves apart from the world that we live in and dedicate ourselves to a life of prayer and to a life of God's presence. And so historically, monastics, the men and women who live in monasteries, they have found themselves living in these cloisters, these kind of internal parts of the monastery, for the vast majority of their life. And so the difference between like a monastic, so a Benedictine, Cistercian, there's a whole bunch of different groups that fit under that category, versus a mendicant, which, in Robin Hood, you got Friar Tuck, you've got the Jesuits, who I think are probably some of the most well-known mendicants today, is that the mendicants have kind of this call to teach. So there's kind of this external aspect to the committed life they're living. They're all religious orders, but there is an element where monasticism tends to be more internally focused, where to be a mendicant, there tends to be some more of an outward focus in terms of teaching, preaching, something like that for the broader community in the world.
So to be clear, because people listening can't see what I can see via Zoom and see some of the pictures maybe that you posted on your social media. You don't live in a monastery. You don't live in
correct.
a set aside on top of a mountain in this. You're not a hermit up there somewhere. You are. I mean, you literally live above a cafe on the streets of Paris, right?
That is correct. Yeah, we have our 50 square meter apartment for my wife, my cat, and I. And we love Paris. It's a wonderful city. If you live here, say hi. We'll go grab coffee. If you visit, I hope you get to. But yeah, the reality is that the monastic impulse, the thing that leads people to be monastic, it's something that's deeply personal. It's not for everyone. There'll be folks that really enjoy it, and there would be folks that it would be kind of maybe the last thing they might ever want to do. And one of the things that we're trying to do with urban monastics, that we're doing with urban monastics, is helping for Protestants, is we're helping them rediscover this part of our shared heritage.
Mm.
And so monasticism starts in the early church. It continues all the way up through the Reformation. And for whatever reason, at the Reformation, the Protestant stream of Christianity, we left monasticism behind. And so how do we rediscover this and rediscover it in a way that makes sense in the 21st century, in the third millennia? We don't have large institutional funding. We can't just go and buy a bunch of buildings and bring people to live in there together. There are monastic communities that are living in cities. The Fraternities of Jerusalem is one. They're here in Paris and Strasbourg and Rome and a couple other places. And so there's nothing about necessarily being in a city that goes against being monastic. For us, it is much more about kind of the inward journey and how do we live lives that reflect and would look monastic to folks that are cloistered,
Yeah.
who are living in monasteries. One of the things that we regularly get notes either through social media or through the forums on our website from people who are living monastic lives, and they see the life they've committed themselves to honored and reflected in the invitations within our way of life, that is based on the rule of Saint Benedict. But it's about, living simply. It's about meeting the busyness of the city with the calm. It's about meeting the loud of the city with quiet. Meeting like how can we live apart in the midst of the places that more and more we find ourselves moving to. Urbanization is a thing. It's not stopping. It's accelerating, if anything. And so how can we intentionally live lives in cities that taps into this beautiful part of our Christian heritage? And for folks like myself, any of you out there that are a little bit more introspective, maybe a little more of an ascetic at heart, a little more contemplative, meditative, I think the monastic stream has a lot to offer in terms of just the richness of knowing that those things that might resonate with your soul, with who you are, have always had a home in the church, the big C church, even though a lot of times our local communities may not have expressions of that. And so, urban monasticism, we're trying to help people connect.
So that's what I want to, this project, the Urban Monastics project, it's like, we can talk about urban monastics as an idea. And then there's also like this project, this real community that I sense that you're gathering, and I'm not going to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the idea that I'm curious about is you seem to be creating I guess a digital platform or a way that people can connect from all over the world and tap into a collective rhythm, tap into a collective rule. Actually, that idea of a rule, the rule of Benedict, or the rule that you've got listed on the Urban Monastics website, is really fascinating to me, mostly because it is voluntary. It is you saying, I would like to submit to this way of life, and I've very clearly defined it. I've put a border around it, and I've said this is the type of life I want to live. And even if somebody doesn't want to be a monastic, I think there's a lot of people who crave clarity about living a life of purpose, living a life of intention, creating a home that has not rules. I'm not talking about rules of authority and punishment, but a rule where we submit to this clear, the things that we know demonstrate the things that we've said are important to us. I'm rambling a lot here, but that's the stuff that gets me excited about the project that you're doing.
Yeah.
Not only as maybe somebody who might be interested in being a part of it, but somebody who might be interested in looking at it and being inspired by it. Am I off base there? Did I mess anything up?
No, that's really wonderful. It's, for me growing up, I grew up Presbyterian PCUSA in Minneapolis. And my church experience never exposed me or taught me much of anything about monasticism, about monastics. And so I found myself, it wasn't really actually until I was in seminary going through church history and learning about different movements within the church and learning about Benedict and reading the rule and being like, wow, this is incredibly interesting. And one of the things that I very intentionally have done with the urban monastic way of life is that there's very little expected of you, I guess, if that's a way to put it. A lot of times, depending on your exposure, your experience at church, you may have even done, sometimes at retreats, they'll invite people to create a rule for their life to go by. And a lot of times the resources and things around that tend to be very almost too structured. It's like, how are you going to spend your time? Like, what are the things you're going to stop doing? What are the things you're going to start doing? And it's very rigid in that. It's this binary of like stopping this, starting this, doing this at this time. And there is, if you go and you actually become a monastic at a monastery, you will find that there is a very rigid schedule for certain things. But a lot of the monastic life is the depths of the soul and the depths of the internal and that relationship with God and others and yourself. And so what we've done with the urban monastic way of life, our commitment, our rule, is there's only three kind of active things that we kind of explicitly say, yeah, you if you're going to do all of this, you want to be a monastic with us versus just sojourn with us, where you kind of journey with us and pick the things that you'd like to do. We ask that you would pray, start and end every day in prayer. We ask that you would take communion or the Eucharist, ideally once a week. And we ask you to fast, ideally once a week. And the rest of it are more passive things. It's like, how do you reduce your consumption? How do you live a simple life? How do you embody the fruit of the Spirit? How do you lean into God's grace and mercy? How do you live with love? Like, these are foundational things that are present in the rule of St. Benedict, and they're present in the history of the church. And we want to meditate on these things and think about these things and engage with them so that the bit of structure we have kind of creates a framework that we can experience closeness with God, transformation of our faith, of ourselves, of our world. And I understand it, the idea of a rule, hey, this guy named Paul on the internet wrote some things down and he's asking people to, like commit themselves to living that way. It's like, yeah, on the surface, I understand that, because that sounds kind of suspect. But I'd really encourage people to go and check it out on our website, because the point is that these are all things that we live into, and we hopefully over time will grow into that. They're the impulses. We're pulling out what are the things that draw people to a monastic way of life, and then how can we equip, gather, and grow this community and the people that find us and want to be a part of it.
Paul, this is not a question that we talked or that I maybe prepped you with, but I'm remembering, I think in the bio on your website, there's a line that says, I'm looking for it. I think I found it. I believe the way we live flows out of the deep wells that are filled with our beliefs and values. The deep wells, and I think you used that phrase earlier, but I start to think about the way you're describing, if you want to be a part of this monastics community, you're gonna do these three things. You're gonna start and end your day with prayer. You're gonna take communion once a week, and you're gonna fast once a week, I think you said. The way I would reflect that back in a way that makes me really excited is, you're building a spiritual container in your week that allows you to tap deeper and deeper into those deep wells. At least that's how I'm hearing what you're saying, and I love the idea of building more structure. Structure has been used to abuse people and has been problematic in a lot of ways. And if you get to build your own structure, build your own container into it, within which you can dive deeper into those deep wells of your soul. Again, I think there's a lot of people who are craving that, but don't find it in their local church, to your point, and don't find it in their normal rhythms of life, the rush and hustle of life.
Yeah.
There wasn't a question there. I think I was just saying things back that I liked that you wrote or that you said.
Yeah, I mean, there is this sense, and you see Jesus talk about, out of the abundance, or out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so there is this very real reality that we long to be judged by how we behave and act at our best. But I think it's when we're stressed, we're tired, we've been walking too long, we're at our end, that where is when your capacity becomes limited, I think we see a more clear picture of who we are. And it's often not flattering. And so the question for me becomes not how do I ensure I never, am tired, am angry, am whatever, because those things will happen. I live in France. There's bureaucracy. The sidewalks are too narrow. People they don't understand that people live here and have appointments, and they just there's metro for those of you that live in cities that have mass transit. There's things that can get you a little upset on mass transit from time to time. Sight, smells, sounds. And so the question for me is, okay, what I think Jesus is pointing at here is that the presence with God and presence with others, that love and joy and gentleness and kindness and all of the fruit of the Spirit, that should be the abundance that overflows out of us. And yet that's not natural. That's not our default state. And so how do we give ourselves time and give ourselves the intention and the slowness and the reflection and in inviting God's kind of illuminating light into the dark recesses of ourselves, so that the wells we have can be reinforced with God's love, that can be reinforced with the fruit of the Spirit, so that it becomes more natural for our response to be gentleness and patience and self-control. And that is this very mystical work that happens between us and the divine. It is not all us. And it also is not something that God just does to us. He doesn't override our agency. He doesn't override our character. He wants to do life with us. And so the vast majority of our way of life are these reminders and invitations that we prompt the community with again and again. Hey, how might you engage with this reality this week? I'm bringing up the fruit of the Spirit because we just had our monthly gathering on Sunday where 5 of us had about a 35-minute conversation around that. And it's wonderful, but it is one of these, what are you giving your attention to? Mm-hmm. What are you thinking about? What are you opening yourself up to? And we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to fall short of our hopes, of our desires, of what we expect of ourselves, what we feel God might expect of us. And so to have a community around you that's gracious, merciful, invitational, that says, yeah, I get it. Come back. It's okay. Come back. We'll let's keep going. For folks that are more on the contemplative side, the meditative side, that this sounds interesting, this sounds inviting and exciting. Our local churches, by and large, aren't set up to do these kind of things, to have these kind of slow burn way of living kind of things. And so Urban Monastics functions for a lot of people as kind of an alternate pathway of spiritual development within their local church. That, maybe you're involved, maybe you aren't in your local church, keep doing that. Urban Monastics isn't trying to be a church. Yeah. We're trying to be a way of life for Christians all around the world, regardless of your denominational or tradition background, to live intentional lives and experience more presence with God and presence with others. And I think that happens through being intentional. So
there's something about knowing that you're in Paris and listening to you in what you were just saying, especially as you were talking about when you're in a city and you're tired and you've been walking too long and you're hungry and how do you respond in those moments? It takes me
Hmm.
to the times when my wife and I have been blessed to be able to take our two daughters on trips to Europe on cool vacations in big exciting cities, and Paris being one of them. And we'd spend days bouncing around these sacred sites, these churches, these museums
Hmm.
holding sacred, beautiful things and uh, symbols meant to remind us of God and of peace and of beauty. And in between, we're lugging around little kids and diaper bags when they were smaller, and we're tired, and the kids are hungry, and we're hungry, and our responses in those moments aren't necessarily maybe reflective of the symbols that we're bouncing around the city to see. Like the irony in that is real, and it's also part of why I think I chose to turn up my own spiritual practices. And some people listening will know that I didn't go to seminary. I'm not a pastor. I don't work professionally in the faith world. In fact, there was a large part of my life where I was just bored by faith of all sorts, and Christianity especially, and I was just disinterested and couldn't find any connection to it. And I think maybe as I got older, and maybe with kids, but maybe just there was a maturity point where I just started asking, there's something there's something that I know that if I did it more, it would help me feel peace more and then help me
Hmm.
be more peaceful. And so for me, that started with daily prayers. For me, that started with actively engaging in conversation around faith with people that I thought were interesting, and it's grown from there. But I to me, just listening to you think about that, and then literally thinking about family vacations that we've taken, including to Paris, and how wonderful it is, and how exhausting it is, and how there are moments that didn't make the Instagram reel of our
Yeah,
family trip to
there's a lot of
Paris.
those moments. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and for me, growing up, faith was a very intellectual thing.
Mm,
It was, trying to understand the ideas of it. I grew up uh, as a kid, kind of just treating it like another school subject. Like there's
mhm,
things here I need to learn. They're going to ask me questions. My tradition had a confirmation process that I went through, and it was, you memorize this creed, and you learn these different things in the class, and that's all fine. I enjoy. I that was a benefit to me, but the challenge is that we live in an age where we want to believe that knowledge is the transforming work.
mm,
And it's not, it just isn't. There's people who, and myself was in this camp for a long time, we learn things about ourselves, about faith, and it feels like that information should be transformational, and then it doesn't transform us. And I joke sometimes that you can learn kind of everything you need to know about being a monastic in a weekend,
mm,
but you'll never get there in a lifetime.
mm,
And it's this challenge, and the same can go for faith. But it's this challenge of like, I studied homiletics, I studied preaching. That was my emphasis at seminary, and I love communicating, I love teaching, I love all of that. But I know at the end of the day that when people listen to me, they're going to go back to their life. Maybe this was a respite for them. Maybe they learned something new, but they will be back in their life very, very shortly. And then what?
mm.
How do we actually do the long, hard work of transformation, of partnering with God in our own transformation? Um, and it's really difficult. And I think the fasting component of, we talked earlier about
Mhm.
the three active components of urban monastics life. The fasting component is one of those that I think we largely misunderstand. I think about and I don't even know if this is dating myself anymore, but the Snickers commercials back in the day, like, oh, you turn into a diva, or you turn into an animal, or you turn into, these commercials where someone was hungry and they turned into, some other celebrity or an animal, and they gave them a Snickers bar, and oh, you're not yourself when you're hungry. And to kind of go back to what I was sharing before, I think maybe that is us.
Mm-hmm.
When we aren't at our best, and to have and create moments where you get to experience yourself in kind of a more raw, authentic state, so that you can look and go, oh Lord, I don't want to be like this. When I'm at my wit's end, like, I want to be more gentle.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be kind when that's the last thing I want. Like, I want to be loving when I don't feel like I have the capacity to even accept love because of, just how I'm feeling and what's going on in my life. And that's incredibly difficult to do. Thankfully, we don't do it alone. But I think it's this question of, a bit of a shift from, oh, if we just knew more, to, well, what does it take to embody, to incarnate what it is we believe? We just celebrated Christmas. Depending on when you listen to this, that will be very timely. And the reality of God with us, of the incarnation, of the Word becoming flesh. Christ is the Word of God, and it's embodied, it's lived, it's human, it has all that I have, all that any of us have, like that can contain the multitudes of the divine. And so for me, it just starts to beg this question, like, how do I need to live so that it's not just an idea in my mind or a thought between some synapses in my brain, that it starts to become a foundational transforming aspect of myself, that I actually incarnate, faith, hope, and love, that I incarnate the fruit of the Spirit, and this is where that, like, you'll never get there, right? But for me, it's like, well, if this is true, if all of this is true, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth the work. It's worth the quiet. It's worth, inviting God to shine light in the dark parts of my soul that no one would ever know exist. And no one will ever know if I work on it or not.
Yeah.
But then it's worth it. Right? Like, if this is true, then to me it's worth it. And so how do we live a life that reflects that for us? That for people who maybe, God's done things in your life, he's made you the kind of person that resonates with these kind of things, that this could be a way to lean into those things, to lean into a life that's more reflective, more meditative, more contemplative, more mystical. Mystical just being, these relationships and experiences we have with the divine. How do we do that? And it's great for people that's not what they need.
Yeah.
Cool. I hope that you find the communities and the spaces and the opportunities to experience the more and more of God in your life. But I know that across the church traditions, Protestant, Anglican, Catholic, Orthodox, there aren't a lot of opportunities, and there aren't a lot of people saying, hey, this matters. If you're this kind of person, like, we're making space for you, and we want you to know that there's other people out there like you, who are taking this seriously, because it can be very lonely feeling.
Yeah. This is a practical, direct relation to what we're doing with the Between community. But on the Urban Monastics website, there's a section, I think, that talks about sort of the Urban Monastics way of life. Your website's great, by the way. It is so. If anybody has a question about what you're talking about, the answer is probably on this Urban Monastics website, including like description of why the symbology in your logo is what it is.
Yeah,
Right?
the seal.
Anyway, I like that stuff. But anyway, so this part of the website talks about hospitality as part of the urban monastics way of life. I want to read
Mhm.
part of that section of the website, and I'd love if you could talk more about it. So it says, hospitality is a cornerstone of communal monasticism. The practice of hospitality is a profound gift to others and ourselves. Yet we must make sure that we let our spirit be the source of this gift, that it flows outwards from the deepest parts of ourselves. It's important that we become able to see the very person of Jesus in others and within ourselves. That felt important for the context of our between community, what we're trying to do with between. Can
Yeah.
we talk about what it means to let the spirit be the source of your hospitality?
Yeah, absolutely. Hospitality is one of those things that um, if you love reading, there's so much you can read and learn about hospitality and its roots in monasticism. Even our hospital system came out of monastic communities, and um, yeah, there's just a lot of wonderful stuff there. And again, you're hearing in this description, this overview of our way of life around hospitality, this invitational tone, but also like we want it to become a natural expression, a natural extension of who you are. And having it come from the spirit um, means that you're able to be hospitable beyond maybe what you might initially think of.
Hmm.
Hospitality. The university that I met my wife at had a hospitality tourism program. Like we understand hospitality to be one thing or one kind of thing. It's often around, hotels and customer service and like those kind of things. If somebody says, "Oh, they're so hospitable," it probably means that they took care of their needs and things like that, which are all wonderful. For us, being in cities, uh, there's two of us that live in just over 500 square feet in our walk-up apartment in Paris. We don't have the space to have an extra bedroom, to have people over. We don't have the resources to do a lot of these things that you might think of more traditionally around hospitality. But we do have the ability, every one of us, to meet others in love and grace and mercy, and to have a posture that comes from within that asks the question, you know, how can I show hospitality towards you? How can I be, uh, you know, a warm, almost like a sense of home in the midst of life, in the
Hmm.
midst of the city? Um, Again, it's kind of that contrast, like we live in urban centers. I live in one of the densest cities in the Western world. Um, so how do we be hospitable? Um, and that's where, for me, like that focus on having it kind of well up from within and be kind of a natural extension of the spirit within you um, is just so beautiful and I think transformative to realize like, oh, what can I do with the little I have? And that could both be like resource wise, and it also could just be like the amount of time or the type of relationship you have with someone.
Hmm.
I think it's possible to show hospitality to people when you're walking around the city. I can be the one that 6'2", tall white guy with long hair. uh, I can be the one to step into the gutter when there's people walking towards me on the narrow sidewalks. And in some ways, like that can be an expression of hospitality. It's saying, "Hey, look, I'll do this so that you don't have to.
Yeah.
Like, let me take care of you in this way." Um, where I'm very well aware that just because of my physical size, if I don't do that, people will often step down into the street or stop and wait for me to pass. Especially, I mean, Paris, some of the sidewalks they're old, so they're very narrow. Um, but yeah, so it's like, how do we understand hospitality? And I've also been in situations where I've stayed with friends or stayed at places, and you just don't feel welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's like, okay, so you've done the actions, you've done the like outward things,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a disconnect as well. And so how do you kind of do that dance together where it is an authentic expression, it becomes an authentic expression of yourself, um, and not just kind of an external like, oh, here's a thing I need to do because
Right.
Somebody said it, or I read the Bible and it's in there, and
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus had to give your cloak to the, give your shoes too, and it's just like, okay, like you can act out those things in a very ungrateful, unloving way, or you can allow them to become kind of more natural expressions of yourself, of your lived experience of and also understanding your boundaries and understanding like what you can and can't do in given moments. And so there's a lot there that is really wonderful, but the hospitality piece is it's actually something that I had overlooked early on with Urban Monastics, and I've become friends with a Cistercian abbot in the south of France, and went down and got to spend some time with him and celebrate his 25th anniversary as an abbot at the monastery. And he brought up hospitality several times, and it was evident that him and the other brothers at the monastery really enjoyed having and caring for the people that visited. And so that was a thing that kind of, with his prompting, going back and saying, okay, this needs to be more explicit. It was present kind of within some of the other aspects of the way of life, but he really impressed on me the value and importance of it, and that it needs to be something that we kind of lead with as an organization and as a community. And so it's I'm glad that it's there. I think it's a wonderful addition to our way of life, which at this point is pretty much probably how it will be. And it's beautiful, but it is, again, it's that like, are we willing to let ourselves be transformed and to do the work with the Lord to experience that?
This makes me think about, sort of so many aspects of our conversation. For me, anyway, the way that I'm relating to our conversation, I keep going through this cycle of how I understand myself, how I express that understanding myself outward, and of course, I could add how I understand God, how I understand myself, how I express myself outward, and how well aligned those three pieces of that cycle are. You made a reel recently. I found it on your Instagram. You were doing like this coffee and homily thing, like in the morning. I loved it. You were making
Homily
coffee.
and coffee.
Yeah, homily and coffee. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the short little video, you said something, and I wrote it down. You said, it's almost like the depth and extent to which I know myself creates the capacity for me to understand others. And that takes me back to sort of this cycle of how I understand myself, how it expresses itself outward. But I'm going to say that again because, man, I like this a lot. It's almost like the depth and extent to which I know myself creates the capacity for me to understand others. That's powerful. That is important. We say a few more words about that idea?
Yeah, it's this, in so many ways it seems obvious, but it also at the same time is really challenging to communicate. I have a background in art, and when you study art at university, very often there is a kind of like a survey of art course, and so you're going and you're watching, you're seeing a bunch of art on slides, statues, paintings, cuneiform tablets, whatever it would be, and you're learning about it. And one of the things that happens is that as you learn more about how to see art, about the progression of techniques, the development of different, even just pigments and techniques and approaches and ways of seeing the world. It changes the way that you see paintings. It changes the way that you see sculpture. It gives you an eye to notice things that you wouldn't notice before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in my experience, the same thing happens with myself and with people. That as I notice things about myself, it gives me a capacity to understand others better.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be a dual-edged sword. And so oftentimes what can happen is you'll have somebody learn something about themselves and then they see it in everyone everywhere. And they feel like they have to, shout it from the rooftop and, oh, I just discovered this thing. And well, great. Self-discovery is awesome. Do it. I don't know that we need to go around critiquing others in that way. But there is this, I think as we go deeper and deeper, we start to learn more about ourselves, the nuances, the little facets that make us who we are. And I think we also start to see and have the opportunity to come to grips with our own shortcomings. In the divine office, there's a prayer that's a part of compliance, is like, for the things I've done and left undone, and we're asking for forgiveness. And so it's this reality that, like, yeah, every day there's going to be things that I need grace and mercy for things that I've done and for things that I've left undone. And so it's this question for me of, wow, like, the more I know myself, even, it gives me a greater dependence on God's mercy that has never failed me. Every day there's more. Every day there's an abundance to more than meet what it is that I need. And so this idea of, the better we understand ourselves, it gives us a greater capacity to understand others. It's both in the, like, oh, I just learned this thing and now I see other people are doing that thing too, and that's really interesting. And it's also, I think, the more that we accept and rest and lean into the brokenness of ourselves, it allows us to fall deeper and deeper into the well of God's mercy. And then it becomes easier to extend that to others.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the conversations are easy. It doesn't mean that we just get run over. But conflict, when one person is, immersed in grace and mercy, is very different than conflict when no one is. And so I think it's one of these challenges we have as people that want to follow Jesus and be transformed by Jesus in the ways that he said we could be. It has to start inside. It has to start in these quiet places. To be one voice of the many that are inviting people into that is really wonderful. But it is a difficult invitation to give, because it's asking for someone to give their whole self to something.
Yeah.
And there are very few things in life that ask that. But somebody needs to. Some of us need to. And so, yeah.
I want to end with a question. I'm going to share another thing that you wrote, but this question is about love, which I think might take us on a journey back through everything we've discussed one way or another, I'm guessing. But I don't really know where this question is going to lead us, but mostly I wanted to ask it because I loved the way you wrote. I found this blog post, I think, that you had written, and the language was beautiful, but it was also a little mysterious to me. The way that you wrote it, it was a little, it invited me to apply my own meaning uh, in ways that were almost uncomfortable and in ways that were almost that stretched me in some cool ways. So I want to just read a little section of this post that you wrote. Um, here's what it said. Sustaining love involves a million choices. It can only be a gift for someone else. There are times in my life that I've had to let my love sit waiting. There are people for whom it is waiting today. May my love be patient, gentle, and without boasting. May it be waterproof on the stoop of their door. I love that, Paul. You describe love as finite in that post. You describe love as the most personal thing you have to give. So I wanted to close our discussion today by giving you a chance to reflect on love. How might we think about love through God's eyes?
Yeah, it's a lot. Um, Love is one of those things that there's so many different definitions and experiences of it. And I think one of the challenges that we have, that I have as somebody who is responding to a call to be vocationally one that proclaims God's love, um, is that, how do we wade into this mess of our experiences of disappointment, of frustration, of hurt, of harm, of um, and as well as all the goodness that we put with love. I don't have complete answers to how to do that for people, how to do that for myself. But I do know that love is not a single thing. Love is not something that you've done and check off the list. That love is something that can become a part of who you are and how you meet others. But the challenge is that the love I see expressed through Christ is love that will always come second to the other, because it needs the other to reciprocate. It needs the other to accept it. You can't make someone love you. And so there is this humble posture that, we can just look at Christ's life, to not make it too personal for me. He was wildly misunderstood by the people he loved. The disciples did things that appalled Christ. I'm thinking specifically about Peter attacking with a sword in the Garden of Gethsemane. I can't even imagine the frustration with that. The people that he loved most were so disconnected from who he was and what he had been trying to teach them. And so how do we then, in our modern world that seems to move faster and seems to have more chaos and seems to have higher stakes, and how do we allow ourselves to be misunderstood while not letting go of the fact that we love those who misunderstand us?
Mm-hmm.
How do we stand up for the image of God in all people? How do we condemn the powerful and the violent for the things that they do, while not giving up on love, while not giving up on gentleness and kindness and patience? I think it's one of those things that we have to, above all else, that we have to give ourselves to. Um, and that's, I think, where, I talk about there being, a million choices, a million ways that we choose to love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think if we follow the example that I see in Jesus, both in my own life and in the scriptures, um, it means that we love without um, an expectation of what the response is. But it's gentle and quiet. Yeah, and it's difficult to do that. But I think when we ask questions like, God, like, how have you loved me? Before I cared, how did you love me? Um, oof,
Mm.
like you start to see that, the gentleness, the patience, the kindness. Um, even as we struggle in our own lives, struggle to figure out who we are, struggle to do better, struggle to be present. Um, you know, God loves us just as much today as yesterday, as tomorrow. And I think it's very difficult for me, and I think for a lot of people, to know of a love that doesn't depend on who I am
Mm.
or what I do, what I can do. Um, that in the midst of nothingness, like, I'm loved. And it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to rest in and think about. But I do believe that that's how God sees me and relates to me, and how he sees and relates to all of us.
Mm.
And I believe that there's an invitation, um, to allow ourselves to move in that direction with how we engage and meet others.
All this conversation is exactly why I wanted to start this podcast. Like conversations like this was not just a beautiful conversation, but it was a exemplary conversation. Exemplary, not of the perfect podcast, but of what I think you want urban monastics to do. You want to invite people into this type of contemplation, this type of depth, uh, and hope that it might fill each of our wells with the sacred light of God. And I'm so grateful for this time. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm grateful that we found each other randomly on the internet and we liked a couple of each other's posts. And I think I was like, I want to learn more about urban
Yeah.
monastics in a comment. And you said, well, set up a call with me. And I did. And what a wonderful, simple interaction in itself. What a very hospitable interaction it was that you immediately just gave me a link to schedule a call with you straight from a internet comment. So I'm grateful for that. Paul, will you remind people how they could interact with you or interact with Urban Monastics? What's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, I just want to reflect real quick. I've also really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really nice. And um, yeah, I mean, getting to hear things that I've written kind of come back to me through a different voice is always a profound experience. So thanks for that, Matt.
Yeah.
You can find out more about urban monastics on our website, urbanmonastic.org. You can also find us on most social media platforms. So we're on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, and I'm not really using it, place formerly known as Twitter anymore, just because of the current state of what it is. But we do still have accounts there. So if you're there, you can find us. I'm also all over the place. So if you find those accounts, you'll probably pretty easily find me. And I would enjoy connect. I always enjoy getting to connect and talk with people that kind of wherever you are in the world. So,
Well, I know you're trying to, as I think your bio says, live a simple, gracious, and integrated life. And may we all uh, have the opportunity to experiment with those ideas and that kind of life. Thanks for joining me, Paul.
yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between Podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.